despite having this persona of this Hollywood sort of young, hot, cool kid, I was this really fearful person behind it. And so traveling helped me sort of burn through that fear and find myself beneath that. You know, some people go to therapy, which I also did extensive amounts of that. But I really found that I could hear myself think and sort of know what was going on with me by traveling far away from home without a plan, usually alone. And so I did that for years. And eventually someone suggested I should start writing a journal to keep track of my travels. And so I thought, oh, okay. So I started to write a journal, and I found that very embarrassing and self-indulgent and silly. And I would read it, and I would just be embarrassed at myself. So I dropped that idea. But there was something in the writing that I found, particularly when you're traveling alone, there's something very sort of stabilizing in it. It gave me structure. So I started, I'm an actor, so I would meet people. And I'd meet some guy on a scooter in Hanoi, and he invited me for a ride, so I jumped on the back of the scooter and spent the day with him. And I wrote that scene down. I wrote down dialogue and story arc and character and all that kind of stuff, which I knew to do from acting. And I did this for years. And when I would come home from the trip, I would throw them in a drawer. For no reason. I was writing this stuff, and yet I did. And then eventually it sort of asserted itself that maybe I'd like to do that too, as opposed to acting. And in addition, you know. So I met an editor of the magazine, and I cornered him at a party, and I said, you ought to let me write for your magazine. And he said, you're an actor, dude. And I was, yeah, but I can tell a story. That's what I do for a living. And he thought that that was a really good answer. And so eventually, after another year of me cajoling him and begging him and pitching him ideas, he relented. I just wore him down. And I said, look, if it doesn't work, you don't have to pay me. And he goes, that I can live with. So I wrote a story for him, and it worked. And it just spread out from there. And so I became, in this parallel, weird sort of way, this parallel shadow career as a travel writer. And suddenly and then when you win an award at something, you're suddenly legitimized, and I was suddenly respected. And as opposed to being some curious thing, or the guy from Pretty in Pink's a travel writer, okay. So suddenly I win an award, and people are like, oh, you're very, very good, a lot of insight you bring, you know, and all this nonsense. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And so, anyway, but I also found out that a lot of what I was writing for magazines wasn't the real trips that I had. You know, you go and you have these big experiences on the road, and what I was writing about for magazines was not the deeply personal experiences I was having. I was writing about whatever Black Pearls, or whatever I was sent to Tahiti to write about. But the sort of big transformative things that happened to me were just left to myself. And so the idea for the book came, to make a long-winded answer to your question, is I finally decided to, my fiance for long-suffering, fiance for 4 or 5 years we were engaged, and we finally decided to get married. And this idea apparently terrified me. So I wanted to know why, you know? And I was in the back of a taxi on the way to Patagonia to do a story for a magazine, and we just decided to get married. And so we were feeling all close and lovey-dovey, the way people do when they make these decisions. And then I was leaving, so I was feeling all sort of weepy in the back of the taxi. But the other part of me was just like thrilled to be going off alone. And I was like, what is the matter with you? I have this deeply sort of love, sort of feeling of connection and tenderness, and yet there's this other part of me that is just like yearning to escape. And I answer questions on the road. When the boot hits the ground, that's how I solve my problems, you know, to a certain degree. And so I asked myself that question: how can I come to terms with this sort of loving and yet this desire for separateness?